Hi, welcome back to Testive Advisor. This week we're going to be going over some special strategies that you can employ on reading questions that appear on the SAT on every single passage. So you should be able to get a lot of mileage out of this lesson and apply it over and over again. I hope you've been having an easy time keeping up with your daily practice and finishing the lessons each week. If you find that you're having a little difficulty, you need a little extra motivation, you can always consider an upgrade to Testive coaching. But for now, let's get on to the lesson.
A very common question type on the new version of the SAT are citing evidence questions. These are going to ask you a question. You're going to have to select the answer choice, and then the next question will ask you which of the following provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question. The question here was, the previous question in this case is, according to the passage, which choice best describes the view of feminist scholars of the new symbolic type? And the answer that they wanted was, the most feminist scholars can hope to do is parody structures of power that hold them captive. Okay, well, to get these questions right, it helps to understand the contrast being set up earlier in the passage. When they're asking about sort of why an answer would be correct, you want to look at the context of the passage as a whole. In this case, we're looking at a contrast between the feminists of the past and the new feminists, let's say, the feminists of this new symbolic type. Put simply, the author is sympathetic with the first group and critical of the second. You want to look at the second to last paragraph where the author most clearly discusses these new feminists of the symbolic type. Remember, topic sentences are very important. We got the word new symbolic type right here, direct quote from the question. And feminist scholars of this new symbolic type seem to think the way to do feminist politics is to use words in a subversive way, in academic publications of impressive obliqueness and contemptuous abstractness. So this is the paragraph that we should be looking at. And if you read this paragraph, you should be able to get the correct answers to both questions. Lines 53 to 59 say here, let's go ahead and go through these together. According to it, we are all, to some degree, captives of the structures of power that have defined our identity as women. So these new feminists who have a type of myopic view of what it means to be a feminist, who are only worried about the theoretical, not necessarily the practical political aspect of feminism here. All they can do, the most they can hope to do, is parody the structures of power. So they're captives of the structures of power that define our identity as women. So that definitely makes this the right answer. Let's see why the others are wrong. So we're leaving the paragraph of the topic sentence that actually quotes new symbolic type. They're not necessarily going to be about that. Lines 20 through 22 here say, well, we're looking at the example of Catherine McKinnon. And keep in mind here, we're talking about how she is an example of the old feminists. You can't go too far into her work without being engaged in a real issue of legal and institutional change. This is very political. We're not just being abstract. We're not just being theoretical here. This is practical. So she's the example of something completely different than this new symbolic type, and she's in the past. She's one of these older past feminists. So that's why that one is wrong. Lines 13 through 15, moreover directly. So moreover here is referring to moreover describing the way feminist scholars have participated in the past in practical projects of change. So not only that, some feminist theories have decided to leave academia altogether, feeling more at home in the world of practical politics, where they can address urgent problems directly, than this whole theoretical thing that the new feminists are doing. So again, we're talking about past feminists, not new feminists. Line 34 through 37. Indian feminists know that they live in a fiercely unjust world. They cannot do without addressing this fact regularly in their theoretical writing and outside their teaching activity. So these women from other countries are a lot more like the past feminists of the US were, not so much like these new feminists. So this is great, but this isn't why, or this isn't talking about the new symbolic type. This is talking about a different type of feminist and from another country who engages in much the same type of activity of the older feminists. So again, we're not really referencing the new symbolic type of feminist theorists here. So that leaves A as the right answer. Now look at all that work. Since you did the hard work in locating the answer in the passage at this point, the citing evidence does become fairly easy. We're like, well, we're looking at the new symbolic type. We know that's going to have to be here with this topic sentence. What are we talking about? It's almost a direct quote. New symbolic type, structure of power. Both of those show up in the question and in the answer, which makes it far easier to locate the answer. Whereas if you actually go back and read all of them, try to figure out what context they're in, you may be wasting a little bit of time. So keep that in mind as you go through this type of problem.
In this words in context question, we're asked, as used in line 29, the word intimately most nearly means romantically, privately, closely, or openly. Now, it's tempting when you're given a words in context to go straight for the dictionary definition of the word, right? To romantically, perhaps for the word intimate, maybe private. But you need to remember the in context part of words in context. You really can't answer these questions without an understanding of the meaning that's being conveyed in the passage. So we're going to go to the reference line and read not just the place where we find the word in question, but also around it. In much of the world, feminist theory still works like this. In India, for example, academic feminists have delved deep into real-world struggles, and academic feminist theory is intimately linked to practical commitments such as... Okay, so we're reading this little portion right here. It's pretty clear that the author is not actually talking about anything romantic, so we can cross that off. We know that open is kind of the opposite of intimate, so we can't choose that. Even in context, that wouldn't be accurate because that's not any kind of a definition of intimate. So then we're left with privately or closely. Well, privately conveys a similar thing to romantic here. So really the only option is close, because the meaning that is trying to be conveyed here is that feminist theory is intimately linked to practical commitments. So you have to ask yourself, well, what's the concept that's being expressed about these two ideas? And it's that they're closely linked, that they're tied together. So closely is the meaning of the word intimately here. We're going to try a slightly more advanced strategy for answering citing evidence questions here. Now, you can't really practice this on the website when you're doing question-by-question reading practice, but this is a good tool to put in your back pocket for practice tests. And when you're taking practice tests, you can definitely employ this strategy to see if it might work out for you on test day. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the first question here. Why does Simon walk ahead of Eleanor? Now, instead of answering this question and searching for the evidence to find what supports one of these answers here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go straight ahead. Okay, we're going to remember this question, why does Simon walk ahead of Eleanor? And then we're going to go straight ahead to our citing evidence question, right? So on a test, you would see these in a pair. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Why does Simon walk ahead of Eleanor? So now we're going to look at our reference lines, all right, for each of these, and we're going to see which of these might give us some evidence for the question, why does Simon walk ahead of Eleanor? All right, so let's start by looking at lines 36 to 39. It says, but the dragonfly went round and round. It never settled anywhere. Of course not, happily not, or I shouldn't be walking here with Eleanor and the children. Tell me, Eleanor, do you ever think of the past? Okay, so this refers to walking. It refers to sort of why he's with, this is sort of a trick. It refers to why he's with Eleanor and the children sort of as a husband and a father, but not actually why he's walking ahead of them. So we can rule this one out. Lines 21 to 24. The man would be Simon, right? The man kept this distance in front of the woman purposely, though perhaps unconsciously, for he wished to go on with his thoughts. So this seems pretty good here. It's telling us that he's out in front of her, and he has a reason. It's purposeful. He wants to go on with his thoughts. Okay, so this one I'm going to put a check mark by. I think it's going to be right. Let's just check. 15 to 18. The figures of these men and women straggled past the flower bed with a curiously irregular movement, not unlike that. Okay, this is about, this is just a description of people walking. There's no reasoning. Line 60 to 63, you might see walked right here, and, if you were getting ahead of yourself, you might choose that. Line 60 to 63, they walked on past the flower bed, now walking four abreast, and soon... Okay, so this is describing the whole family walking. So again, it's just a description of walking. So it looks like lines 21 to 24 are going to be our correct answer here. So we've already finished this one, and now we need to go back and look at what it provided evidence for. Why does Simon walk ahead of Eleanor? He wants some space to continue to reflect. He is upset by her earlier rejection of him. He is chasing after a dragonfly up ahead. We can rule that out. That's silly. That's not what he's doing. He is bothered by Eleanor's slow pace of... No. Well, we know he wanted to be alone with his thoughts, which is the same as saying he wants some space to continue to reflect. So you can see here that you can actually use these pairs of questions to answer both of them more efficiently. So with more speed and with greater accuracy.
This example here is a typical example of a words in context question. We have an expression here, bore on, used in line 20, and you have to, from the context of the passage, figure out what it means. Well, let's go ahead and read the sentence, and always remember, read a sentence before and after to sort of know what's going on. Especially in these prose type passages, you have like a narrative. There's not going to be any topic sentences. There's nothing else you really need to do. But try to remember sort of what was going on in the passage after having read all of it, and then attempt the problem. Okay, well, it says, this is where the sentence begins, so I'm going to go one sentence before that. The figures of these men and women straggled past the flower bed with a curiously irregular movement, not unlike that of the white and blue butterflies who cross the turf in zigzag flights from bed to bed. The man was about 6 inches in front of the woman, strolling carelessly, while she bore on with greater purpose, only turning her head now and then to see that the children were not too far behind. The man kept his distance and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so it looks like we've had a really nice garden here. We have a man very close to a woman, and the man strolls carelessly while the woman bores on. So to bore, it means usually to drill a small hole into something. I'm thinking of like a plank or something, and then you're boring a hole through it. But it's also generally used for when somebody is passing through something, making their way through something, generally a crowd. So you have a crowd of people and you're boring through the crowd, you're going through the crowd. What does it mean in this context? The man is strolling carelessly while the woman is just boring on. Okay, so did she hobble on? Not necessarily. It looks like she's making her way through that situation, whatever that means in this context. No, not necessarily hobble. That's not what that means. To drag on, maybe. You could assume that she's dragging, but we don't necessarily know that. Oh, we're saying it's going to be the opposite or different from strolling carelessly, but reaching the fact that she's dragging necessarily, that'd be an assumption there. Persisting on. This makes a bit more sense. We're saying it's almost like making it through. So have you ever heard the expression making it through the day? Something of the sort here. When she bore on, just sort of making it through while her husband was strolling carelessly. So it looks like she persisted with greater purpose. This looks like a good one. See how different this is from dragged, which implies maybe drag is meant to imply persisting, but then it wouldn't be persisting itself. Dragging is simply just the act of, dragging something against the surface. It's not the same as, or it doesn't carry the same connotation necessarily as persisted does, which tells you that she's sort of struggling against something. like boring on through something, where when you're drilling a hole through something, you're sort of struggling against the surface to make the hole, or struggling against a crowd to go through it, making it through the day, making it through, so that sort of thing, boring through. Okay, this last answer chose why isn't this one correct then? Doug, well, if it means to, to sort of like dig a hole or dig yourself through the crowd, why doesn't it mean that in this context? Well, what would she actually be digging with greater purpose? It doesn't seem to be a literal use of the word here in this context. If it were sort of talking about the way that the guy is strolling, it looks like here we're going to be talking about the way that she is walking herself as they walk together through this garden. So we're talking about the way that she walks, not really the way that she literally bears a hole. So because it's meant, poetically in this sense, answer choice B is sort of the way that you want to look at this one.
That's all for today. Thanks for staying tuned, and happy prepping.